Welcome to the 2016 Agricultural Peak Employment Wage and Practice Employer Survey. The actual survey is divided into three sections: farm information and employment, crop employment, and comments. Our goal is to answer the most common questions you may have when completing the 2016 survey. Please feel free to contact us with any additional questions. With your input, Employment Security can determine what agricultural employment actually looks like at the ground level. In turn, we provide the information to the U.S. Department of Labor to make their determination. As always, any information you provide to the Employment Security Department or to survey administrators is voluntary and confidential, except for specific circumstances under the Revised Code of Washington 50.13.060. We encourage you to complete the survey online. However, if you prefer to complete the survey on a paper copy, we can mail it to you with a postage-paid return envelope, or the University of Washington is happy to administer the survey by phone. The questions remain the same no matter what version you choose. Let's switch gears. We'll focus on the survey for the remainder of our time. We'll walk you through the entire process, which is divided in three sections to show you how to properly complete the survey. So, let's get started. This is page 1 of the survey. The upper section of the first page gives you a bit of the background we discussed earlier. It is very important for you to complete the contact information. Let's go ahead and move on to page 2. Here you will find the definitions of terms we use in the survey. While it's easy to gloss over a full page of definitions, it is very important that we all speak the same language. We will present them step by step. However, for an in-depth definition, you may take a couple of minutes to review them on your own via the link in the description of this video. We want to learn about the seasonal and migrant workforce. For this survey, please do not include any year-round workers or managers who work at your establishment. Laborer is a worker, what most people would probably consider to be manual farm labor. Supervisor, a worker who directly supervises or coordinates the activities of laborers and or equipment operators. Checkers or foremen would fall into this category. Equipment operator, non-supervisory worker whose primary duty involves the operation of heavy equipment, including trucks or haulers, forklifts and skid loaders, sorting machines, crop washers, and clodhoppers. Housing. We want to know if accommodations for non-working family members of seasonal or migrant workers was provided. In addition, we want to know if the family housing was provided free of charge. Free of charge. There is no charge for rent, security deposit, or other similar incidentals related to housing. Or, if the employer secures public housing, the employer pays any charges normally required for the use of the public housing. Basically, free family housing means, well, free. Not free of charge. Housing made available to non-working family members of seasonal and migrant workers where a financial cost is imposed on the worker and his or her family as a condition of residence. Note, any imposition of cost on the worker or his or her family, even if such payment is just a token in nature, renders the housing unit in question as non-free for the purposes of this survey. Finally, note that housing is just provided to seasonal and migrant workers, and not their families, is not considered to be family housing. A productivity standard is a minimum requirement workers must meet as a condition of continued employment. For example, perhaps as a farm manager, I might set a standard of 14 30-pound lugs per day for a red cherry harvest. With this productivity standard in place, any worker who fails to meet up to the minimum standards on a regular basis may be subject to sanction up to and including termination. Bonus rates. For example, if I pay my red cherry harvesters a base piece rate of $5.50 per 30-pound lug, but I pay my more experienced workers at a higher per unit bonus rate, then for this survey, they are two separate pay rates. My less experienced workers will make a 25-cent per 30-pound lug bonus. My more experienced workers will make a 50-cent per 30 lug bonus. Once again, this distinction is important for the Department of Labor, despite the fact that both groups of workers are receiving the same base unit piece rate. Okay, let's move on to page 3 and the start of the actual survey. Question number 1. How large is the work site in total acres? Please enter the total number of acres your farm produces crops on. Question number 2. Please list all crops you grow on this farm. For this question, we are interested in all crops, but not on crop variety. Crop variety activity combinations are important later on in the survey. Question number 3. Did you use the H-2A program to hire temporary foreign workers? This is a yes or no answer. If yes, go to question 4. If no, skip on to question 5. Question 4. Please list all crops for which you use the H-2A program to hire temporary foreign workers. Be sure to include all that apply to your operation. Do you hire seasonal or migrant workers? As mentioned before, a seasonal and migrant worker does not work year-round and was not brought in from another country under the H-2A program. Now, if you do not hire seasonal or migrant workers, I have good news for you. You are almost done with the survey. Please skip to section 3, page 6 to provide us with your comments. If you do hire domestic, seasonal, or migrant workers, please continue on to question 6. Question 6. Please list all crops for which you hire seasonal or migrant workers. This is the end of section 1. Let's move on to section 2, crop employment. Section 2 looks quite different from section 1. Instead of answering a series of questions, we will fill out the first page of the table, providing information about crop employment. The survey table is asking for information regarding seasonal or migrant workers, those workers that do not work year-round and were not part of the foreign workers program under H-2A. However, keep in mind that we want to hear from both H-2A and non-H-2A employers. We are interested in any and all domestic seasonal workers and their corresponding workers that are employed. This is critically important. We want information about local, domestic, and corresponding seasonal and migrant workers only. Please note that answers should reflect the busiest week of last season. We need to know what wages were being paid and what practices were in place for each combination of crops, variety, and activity during the busiest week for that crop, variety, or activity combination. The easiest way to fill out the form is from the left to the right. Please note that the activities with different wage rates should be entered on separate lines. For example, harvesting versus pruning would be 2 lines. Continuing with the example, if strip versus selective harvesting have different wage structures, they would also be entered on separate lines. For these examples, let's pretend I have a farm called Mirror Pond, where we grow red cherries and hire seasonal and migrant workers. Note that the following answers are just an example. Your responses will likely be different. Please fill out the table with the actual wages and employment practices for your farm. With that in mind, let's begin filling out the example table. Crop. Under the crop column, I would write cherries. Crop variety. And because I grow red cherries, I note red under the variety column. If you grow different varieties, enter the varieties on different lines. For the third column, activities and occupation, we need to think about all the activities for which we use seasonal and migrant labor in the production of red cherries. So, at Mirror Pond, we use seasonal and migrant labor to prune cherries in the winter and harvest cherries in the early summer. We note these activities on different lines and move on to the busiest week. In column 4, we identify the busiest weeks for the red cherry harvest and also for the pruning. At Mirror Pond's farm, the busiest week was January 10th through 16th when we were pruning. The busiest week for harvesting red cherries was June 5th through 11th, so I'll note that week in column 4 as well. Wages paid per unit. For the 5th column, I need to carry across the crop variety activity combination information I provided. so I can write the rate of pay per unit for that specific time. For example, at Mirror Pond Farm, we paid workers $5.50 per lug of red cherries during the week of June 5th through 11th, our busiest week of the red cherry harvest season. Unit size or dimension. I have to figure out how big is a lug used for red cherry harvest. Since we use a 30-pound lug, I'll enter 30 pounds into the sixth column. Number of workers paid. During our busiest week, we had 75 seasonal and migrant workers harvesting red cherries. They were paid $5.50 per 30-pound lug. Remember, the question is about seasonal and migrant workers, not about the temporary foreign workers program under H-2A. Hourly rate guarantee. Do you guarantee a minimum hourly level of pay, regardless of how much piece rate workers actually pick? At Mirror Pond Farm, let's say our minimum hourly guarantee is the adverse effect wage rate. So let's fill in $12.69 an hour in column 8, just like this. Next, we would move down to the following row and answer for red cherry pruning. We paid our seasonal and migrant, non-H-2A, workers the adverse effect wage rate of $12.69 an hour to prune cherry trees. The unit size dimension is not needed because we are paying by the hour and not by the unit. We had 8 seasonal and migrant workers pruning red cherry trees during the week of January 10th through 16th. And the hourly rate guarantee is not needed because we are already paying by the hour. Next, we will talk about page 5 of the survey, where the questions center around bonus pay, minimum production standards, experience requirements, family housing, and acres of particular crops. Let's keep in mind the information we need to provide is about the seasonal or migrant workers. These are workers that do not work year-round for you and were not foreign workers under the H-2A program. How many workers receive bonus pay? First column, how many workers, if any, receive bonus pay in addition to their base rate? Let's say that out of 75 seasonal or migrant workers who harvested red cherries for us during the week of June 5th through 11th, we paid a bonus to 35 of our workers. Go ahead and indicate this in the first column and move on to column 2. Next, we will talk about how much and how it was computed. Let's say our bonus rate for 35 seasonal and migrant red cherry harvesters that received a bonus during the busiest week of the cherry harvest season was 50 cents per lug. Put that into the second column. How often was the bonus payment paid? We at Mirror Farms need to identify the frequency of bonus payments to the 35 workers. We paid a bonus on a weekly basis, and here is where I will key in that information, and then I will move on to the next column. Minimum production standards. Do you recall what a productivity standard is? I will read the definition. A minimum amount of work a seasonal or migrant worker must produce as a condition of job retention, where the failure to meet a minimum standard results in training, progressive discipline, and possible termination. Here we need to quantify the productivity standard if one existed. So, let's say at Mirror Pond Farms we had a minimum productivity standard for red cherry harvesters during our busiest week identified as June 5th through June 11th. We required workers to pick at least 14 lugs of cherries per day to remain in good standing. So, we can go ahead and enter that productivity standard in the fourth column of page 5. Note that not everyone or every crop variety activity combination will have a productivity standard. In the event that you do not have a productivity standard for a particular crop variety activity combination, simply put the words "not required." Also keep in mind that this needs to be a quantifiable productivity standard. This means it needs to take the form of some amount of product per some unit of time. Some employers have productivity standards related to hygiene, showing up for work on time, working hard, etc., which is fine, but these are not quantifiable productivity standards and do not provide useful information for the survey estimations. Moving on to the fifth column of page 5, We are now asked to identify whether we require prior experience when making hiring decisions regarding red cherry harvesters. If so, how much experience do we require? We'll say that Mirror Pond Farm does not require its red cherry harvesters to have any prior experience. We are going to put "not required" in column 5 of page 5. If your farm requires prior experience for any crop variety activity combination, you need to put in the number of months of experience you require. If so, you might put 3 months or 6 months where we keyed "not required." The next question is, did you provide family housing? Column 6 of page 5 asks us about the housing provided to non-working family members. Note that this question is not referring to housing that is provided to workers only, but to workers and their non-working family members. This is a yes or no answer. Did you provide such housing to any non-working family members? If you provided such housing to even one non-working family member, your answer must be yes. At Mirror Pond Farms, we did not provide housing for any non-working family members of red cherry harvesters. Therefore, we answered no to this question and wrote an N. Was the family housing free of charge? Column 7 is an extension of the previous column. This question is asking us whether we provided such housing free of charge. According to definition, free housing means there is no charge for rent, security deposit, or other similar incidentals related to housing. Or, if the employer secures public housing, the employer pays for any charges normally required for the use of public housing. Basically, free means free. No charges are imposed on the worker nor his or her non-working family members to occupy the housing unit in question. Now, because in our example, Mirror Pond Farm is not providing any sort of housing for non-working family members of red cherry harvesters, our answers to this question is NA. If you do provide housing for non-working family members, but you charge any sort of fee, rent, surcharge, etc., then the family housing is not provided for free, and you will answer this question as no. Alright, last column. How many acres of a particular crop? The last column on this page asks how many acres or trees of a particular crop we had in production last season. Let's just go ahead and say that the 350 acres in production at our fictional Mirror Ponds farm, 85 of them are devoted to red cherries, so we will fill that out. With this, we completed reporting for red cherry harvest at the Mirror Pond farms. We didn't pay any red cherry pruners a bonus, so we'll put down a 0 for the number of workers who received a bonus. This means the bonus rate, unit, and time duration of bonus payments are irrelevant, so we'll put down NA for all 3 of these. We did require a productivity standard of 20 trees per day, so we'll go ahead and put that down in the appropriate place. We required 12 months of prior tree pruning experience, so we'll mark that down. We did not provide housing to any non-working family members, so that's also a no, which means that the question about free housing for non-working family members is irrelevant, so that is an NA. And finally, the same cherry trees we harvested this summer were pruned in the winter, so the 85 acres devoted to red cherries remains the same. The Department of Labor regulations require us to request all of this information for each crop variety activity combination at each of the surveyed agricultural establishments. Once I'm all done, I will end up with a completed survey that looks like this. Okay, there you have it. I want to re-emphasize a couple of points before winding down this webinar. First, this webinar just serves as an example on how to fill out the survey. The wages and practices for this is a fictional example and will likely not reflect the conditions at your place of business. Fill out the survey as it reflects the wages and employment practices at your farm or orchard. Second, remember that you are to report only for seasonal and migrant workers in Section 2. Any worker brought in from another country under the H-2A program is not to be included in your totals on this table. Third, you are to report for the busiest week, the week you identify in the 4th column of the table. Make sure you keep these things in mind at all times when you're filling out the survey. Section 3, Comments. We're almost done. We welcome your feedback in Section 3, which is the last page of the survey. Please tell us what sort of variables affect the wage rates you are reporting. Thank you very much for your time and participation in the 2016 Agricultural Peak Employment Wage and Practices Survey.